In this video, I'm going to respond to the question, what is commercial real estate? And I'm going to do this with the interests of a high net worth investor in mind. My name is Edward, I'm a chartered surveyor, and up until recently I was an associate lecturer teaching real estate investment finance and real estate valuation. I'm currently head of investment finance at a property division of a FTSE 100 listed company in the city. So day to day, I'm actively involved in property or real estate investment decisions.
I was more impressed by the contents of my handkerchief the last time I blew my nose.
All right, so if we're going to respond to this question, what is commercial property? We presumably need to produce, or I need to produce, a definition. And you know what? I've tried to be really generous and positive and upbeat about this topic. And actually, I have to accept the fact that I reckon 99% of people in the Western world would define commercial property as really, really boring. So then we look at a definition provided by an industry-leading authority on commercial property. So specifically, I'm referring here to the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. And yes, I accept that is an organisation that is based here in the UK, but it does have a stretch across a number of jurisdictions globally. So I think it's fair to say that the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors definition, or the RICS definition, is probably reasonably applicable to commercial real estate on a global basis. And their definition is given as follows. Yeah, right. So I can now understand why quite a lot of people may find commercial property quite dull, but we're going to stay on this dry material, but I'm going to race through it as quickly as I reasonably can. You see, I think it's really important that any potential property investor also has regard to the Town and Country Planning Act. That is a useful piece of legislation that contains something called the Use Classes Order. Now, the Use Classes Order classifies, as the name suggests, all different types of property here in the UK as per their use. So, for example, it defines coffee shops as a particular use type. It defines a residential house as a particular use type. It defines an industrial building or an office block as a particular use type. The issue, though, is that there is no one single classification for commercial property. They are all individually classified. So rather than going into any more detail in this video, I would suggest that if you are a keen property investor or you're getting into property investment, Google the Use Classes Order, make sure it is the 2020 version that you have saved, because that's the latest version, and then bookmark it. And then the reason why you should have regard to that is because potentially some of your investment decisions may involve a particular class of property that might have restrictions around how it is subsequently used. And of course, as soon as you hear the word restrictions, you hear the potential to inhibit your investment performance. So it's always worth knowing what any restrictions are. And then finally, on that Use Classes Order, having said I'd be quick, I'm definitely going on a little bit longer than I would like.
Yes, get on with it!
Finally then, on that Use Classes Order bit, remember that to convert one type of property, which has a specific or designated use, to another type of property that has an alternative use classification, sometimes can be done without planning consent. But sometimes, to make that jump from one use type to another use type, you need to obtain planning consent. So from an investor perspective, what we're thinking about here is that to obtain planning consent provides two elements. One is an element of risk. You're not guaranteed to get that consent. And the other element is the element of delay. And of course, when we have investment at play and we introduce a delay to that investment program, that can cost us a little bit more money. So we may need to factor that in, or it might be that that delay rules out an investment decision and makes it something that we're just not going to proceed with. Okay, so next step then is to consider a definition of commercial real estate that probably has a lot more value to an investor and allows an investor to make a really clean distinction between commercial real estate and other forms of real estate. So residential property and agricultural property are not commercial real estate. So it follows then that any land or any building that is used and occupied by a commercial entity for the purpose of making a profit is probably going to be commercial real estate. And you hear that word probably, what you should then do is refer back to that use classes order and consider the type of building that you're looking at, and then move on from that position and identify in the use classes order as the specific type of commercial property that you are looking at. Okay, so I've had a stab at defining commercial real estate, and certainly that is the point of the video. What is commercial real estate? So you require a definition. But I think the value of the video is probably in talking through, albeit very briefly, 4 specific examples of commercial property. And so the first 2 that I'm going to look at are 2 common types of commercial property that tend to be the first stages in commercial property investment undertaken by a high net worth individual investor. And just because they are typically the first stages of commercial real estate investment does not render them in any way basic or inferior. In fact, actually, they really are wonderful. And what you might well see in my enthusiasm for the first type, which is light industrial property, is that particular type of property is definitely something that I personally am intending to invest in over the next 3 to 5 years. So I'm going to cover 2 types of property that are quite common first stages, and then I'm going to cover a 3rd type of property, commercial property, which is more of a current trend, and I'm going to talk to that trend and express some of my I'm not going to beat around the bush, some of my concerns about it. And then finally, I'm going to provide a 4th class of commercial property investment, which may well come as a surprise to most of you watching this video, but actually is possibly my favourite type of commercial property, and definitely something that I personally will be wanting to invest my own money into over the next 5 to 10 years. So let's get going. Let's take a look at the first type of commercial property example. These are just industrial buildings, but I love this sort of stuff from an investment perspective. And these are brand new. They're absolutely, well, they're brilliant. I absolutely love them. They've actually got quite modern materials on them. I would imagine they've been built to quite a high environmental standard as well. But notice that they are currently vacant. And that's quite interesting. The investor that owns this land has clearly built these units on what is known as a speculative build basis. That means that they built them without the comfort or the security of knowing that they have a guaranteed tenant to come in and take occupation and pay them rent. And that's okay if you know your local market well enough to be sure that there is enough demand for buildings like this and that you're going to get them occupied pretty quickly. In this particular case, I'm pretty certain that if we come back here in about 3 to 6 months' time, these units will all be fully occupied. And I love this sort of stuff. I know that's a little bit of a nerdy thing to say, but from an investment perspective, if this is your first move into commercial real estate, something like this would be a really, really good idea. Because if you can stretch to acquiring 2 or more of these units, what you've got then is at any one time, if you have one of them vacant, you've got cash flow from those that are occupied. And I love that security of making sure that any vacancy period that you've got is mitigated either in full or in part financially by the income that you get from the occupied unit next door. As you can probably tell from my animated tone, I'm a pretty big fan of light industrial property, and saying that out loud really does seem very, very sort of nerdy and dull indeed. But honestly, I really think that light industrial property, especially for a first direct move into commercial property investment, is a wonderful choice. Okay, so moving on, let's take a look at retail property. Debate has raged for a number of years in the UK about the health of the UK high street and whether actually the advent of the internet is going to mean a complete decimation of our high street shops as we do more and more of our shopping online. But actually that's always been the case, and if you think about the very, very early days of the internet, we still had trends and changes on the UK high street. For example, Starbucks in the late 1990s arriving in the UK and introducing that cafe culture to UK high streets. And so the point I'm trying to make is that as an investor, if you're looking at property, retail property in particular, there are lots and lots of opportunities just like that building behind me. But it's selecting the right one which is the real key. The real art is actually in being able to assess the opportunity before committing any heavy money up front. If you are interested in retail property, I have actually done a dedicated video on a particular investment opportunity, and I'll link that at the end of this video. Now, as I alluded to in that video, retail property does present a slightly higher degree of challenge because the UK high street at the moment is under pressure, but that is not to say that there aren't decent investment opportunities to be found along the high street. It just might take a little bit more time to piece that deal together. So if you're one of those investors that wants to get into commercial property investment but doesn't really want to learn it and just wants to do it, then I would haver against high street retail investment because I think your workload there is probably going to be a bit higher than you might necessarily like. All right, so that is light industrial property and retail property. I said I was going to cover a third aspect or third class of commercial property and highlight some of my concerns about it. So this is a trend that I've observed over the last 5-7 years, and the trend is to convert B&B type properties, typical traditional B&B, larger B&B type properties, characterised or classified as residential use, not commercial, but convert them through the use classes order into serviced accommodation. And now serviced accommodation does satisfy the commercial property tick box. So that then means that it could potentially go into a pension wrapper like a SIP or a SAS. And that then means it can pose some quite significant financial and tax advantages to an individual investor. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole. What I want to do is just come back out a level to a macro scale. And whilst I have no problem with the conversion of B&B units to serviced accommodation, what I do have a problem with is the potential for HMRC, so the UK Tax Authority, if you're watching this anywhere outside the UK, HMRC to swoop in, take a closer look at some of these serviced accommodation properties and potentially deem them to be residential use. And the reason why I say that is because the way some of these smaller units are being run is very much on the now commonly accepted Airbnb type format. So they actually appear on Airbnb platforms. The key is maybe held in a key locker, accessed with a code, and there is potentially no one at a front desk to meet and greet and show the resident or the guest to their room. And it's really one factor in there in particular that I think is going to pose a problem, and it is that reception desk and whether that desk is manned. And it's a tiny detail, but it keeps appearing in articles that I'm reading. And I suspect that for the moment, whilst an automated reception desk and an automated access system is acceptable, I have a hunch, and it is only a personal hunch, that HMRC may well take a close look at this and decide that serviced accommodation must meet a higher level, a more onerous level of service. So that's one to look out for. And I would say that if you're going down that conversion from residential to serviced accommodation route, just be wide open to the fact that actually the status of your service accommodation units may change down the line. Let's move on to the fourth option because I'm really excited about this one, and it is this. This is commercial forestry, and I'm definitely not introducing this as some sort of joker in the pack or curveball offer, because when it's done properly, and that is an incredibly simple thing to do by the way, commercial forestry offers high net worth investors an amazing opportunity. I'll cover off some of those advantages right now. So first of all, the land that I'm standing on is identified as business property, so it qualifies for business property relief. In a nutshell, what that means is when you own this property and you pass it on to subsequent generations, it is unaffected. The value of this land is unaffected by inheritance tax. It is exempt from inheritance tax. The trees you see growing around me, well, as they grow, they increase in value, and that value in your standing stock of timber is exempt from capital gains tax. So the bigger your trees get, the more valuable they become, but you have no capital gains tax to worry about. And what about when they reach a point that you can sell them, you can harvest them? Well, first of all, let's look at the market demand for timber here in the UK. The UK is a massive net importer of timber. We have a huge demand for timber that we cannot satisfy domestically. And yes, we do grow incredibly good quality timber here in the UK. So it is likely that there will always be a demand for these trees around me. So when the time is right and you can decide when you want to fell your timber and sell it, you can get income from the sale of your commercial timber. And that income is also exempt from tax. Just make sure though that the trees you're selling are classified as commercial. And like I say, that's a very, very simple thing to do. So there we are, commercial forestry. I'm going to be doing plenty of videos on forestry because you can probably tell that a little bit like the industrial property, this one's got me animated. I love forestry as an investment. It makes a lot of sense. And one of the nuanced advantages to it is if you're not a people person, you don't need to worry about tenants. You can actually come along here with a picnic, chill out, relax, and it's good for your soul as well as your wallet. Yeah, the camera wasn't really zoomed in there, but pretty much all the time I was in that forestry, I had a big grin on my face. I absolutely love it. And if the idea of having a long-term investment with the potential for sort of periodic income that is tax efficient, not tax avoiding, but tax efficient, suits you very well, then yeah, definitely don't dismiss commercial forestry. And if you've got questions on that or anything else I've raised in this video, please do send me an email. My email is edward@edwardab.com. I love to get your questions. They're already starting to come through. This channel is really young. Oh, and please help me if you want to. I'd love it if you subscribe because it helps me grow the channel. But getting back onto the questions, please fire them through. Put them in the comments below. Send me an email because actually it helps me then frame the topics for questions that need to be answered in subsequent videos.